In August 2026, the gross federal debt of the United States officially crossed a massive threshold, $40 trillion. To grasp the sheer scale of that number, imagine spending $1 every single second without ever stopping to sleep. You would need roughly 1.27 million years to exhaust $40 trillion. Laid end-to-end, 40 trillion $1 bills would stretch roughly 21 round trips between Earth and the Sun. While these comparisons provoke absolute astonishment, that feeling is not economic understanding. The sheer scale of the number is actually a distraction from how the math really works. Human brains are wired to understand proportional jumps rather than absolute mathematical differences. Cognitive scientists refer to this as ratio dependence. This animation illustrates why. Multiplicatively, the jump from a million to a billion is identical to the jump from a billion to a trillion. They are both exactly 1,000 times larger, even though the additive gap is wildly different. Cross-cultural research, like studies involving the Munduruku people in the Amazon, demonstrates that this logarithmic compression is deeply embedded in our biological intuition. We physically lack the internal hardware to intuitively feel the exact difference a 13-zero number makes. Because our unaided minds struggle with exact arithmetic at this level, we obsess over the terrifying 40 trillion headline while entirely missing the real economics of government borrowing. This chart breaks down the composition of that top-line number, revealing a mixed bag. Roughly 20% of the 40 trillion total is actually intragovernmental debt. That specific portion isn't external borrowing at all. It represents one branch of the federal government holding the treasury obligations of another, like the Social Security Trust Fund. This brings us to a common myth, dividing the gross debt by the U.S. population to claim every citizen owes a $117,000 invoice. The math is straightforward, but it is completely useless economics. For sovereign nations, the correct denominator to look at is gross domestic product, or GDP. GDP measures the total economic output of a country, representing the actual scale of the economy from which the government can draw revenue. Asking exactly how many total dollars are owed leads us down the wrong path. The only metric that actually matters is how much of the nation's total economic output is required to support that borrowing. To evaluate that, we have to separate the deficit from the debt. Think of water flowing into a reservoir. The deficit is the flow of new money entering over a specific period, while the debt is the total accumulated stock of water. This is where the standard household budget analogy breaks down. The United States does not have a finite lifespan. It doesn't retire, and it will never need to accumulate $40 trillion in cash to pay off every outstanding bond at once. Instead, governments constantly roll over their obligations. When older securities mature, the Treasury repays them by issuing new ones. Because this debt is constantly rolling over, with an average maturity of just under 6 years, it is the prevailing market interest rates that dictate the actual cost of carrying the balance. A $40 trillion principal balance tells you very little on its own. It requires knowing the interest rate, the maturity timeline, and the size of the economy paying the bill to have any real economic meaning. This formula reveals the arithmetic of debt sustainability. Relative debt depends on interest rates, economic growth, and the budget balance. If growth outpaces interest, the debt burden shrinks. That if interest exceeds growth, the government must run surpluses to prevent an upward spiral. There is no universal magic cliff, like a precise 90% debt to GDP ratio, that causes instant insolvency. A country's safety depends entirely on balancing these specific economic variables. Sometimes people assume inflation is a free solution to this equation. While it does reduce the real value of older obligations, persistent inflation forces investors to demand much higher nominal yields on newly rolled over debt. The actual danger the United States faces right now is that interest expenditures are rapidly consuming a larger portion of all federal spending. Current projections indicate that the debt-to-GDP ratio is actively rising rather than stabilizing. Passing the 40 trillion mark does not trigger a sudden mathematical disaster. The underlying math functions exactly the same at 39.9 trillion as it does at 40.1 trillion. To truly understand our economic future, we have to stop letting our psychology be hijacked by a terrifying string of zeros.